Alright, so this is the video on Adorno and Horkheimer. Their chapter that we read is called The Culture Industry, Enlightenment of Mass Deception. And again, with enlightenment in the title, it indicates that they are critiquing the Enlightenment, particularly the ideas of Kant. So I'll say up front that this is a dense and kind of challenging read, but I'm going to highlight the things that I want you to take away from it. So, number one is what is called the culture industry, something that they are critiquing. And again, I'll say, like with Foucault, that Adorno and Horkheimer are highlighting now stuff going on in the social atmosphere, which is outside of us, that ends up affecting us on the inside. So the culture industry is their main foe that they highlight. Now the culture industry is the whole shebang. It's media, but it's not just news media, but it's part of that. It's entertainment, it's television, it's movies, it's radio, and it's basically, when we say the culture industry, we're talking about mainstream stuff. So when we're talking about movies, we're talking about mainstream blockbuster movies, superhero movies, rom-coms, not stuff at weird indie art house movies, not stuff like that, not like experimental music, but pop music and pop culture and reality television and the 24-hour news cycle and social media, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So the culture industry, this is the big, complex technological mechanism that creates culture, So the kind of, culture that we have with movies and whatnot, it's kind of replaced art. I mean, I don't want to insult anything, but, would you say that, the superhero movie, is it art? In the sense of art being the kind of things that challenge norms and get us to think differently and displace kind of familiar concepts of the things that we're used to. If that's what art is something that challenges us to think more critically, then most pop culture stuff, it's not really art, even if it, let's say, takes a certain artistic design to come up with something or to choreograph a scene or whatever. That's all well and good. It's not to say that it doesn't take a talent, and it's not to say that it doesn't take a skill, but what are movies and music that's on the radio that is, you turn on the radio if you still listen to radio, and basically you hear the same songs over and over and over again, and these are like hits that are like designed to be, money-making machines, money-making mechanisms. It's not about, let's say, let's get underground artists out there and get diversity out there, let's get things that make people think out there. It's, let's get things that continue to placate people and select the most kind of banal and unchallenging kind of stuff, and instead of having art, we'll call that culture. And it'll give you something to talk about with your friends, it'll give you something to chat about with your coworkers. Did you see this movie? Did you see what happened on The Bachelor? Yada yada yada. So what are the kinds of things that characterize the culture industry? Well, one thing that you'll notice is if you have satellite television. Okay, so one of the things that characterize it is homogenization and sameness, right? But homogenization, meaning all things being the same, is actually belied by the appearance of diversity. So to the question of the satellite television, you get a satellite and you have 500, 1,000, 300 channels, something like that, right? And so you think, oh, with 300 channels, I must have lots of different things to watch. But then 10 different stations are playing reruns of Family Guy or whatever, So you have this and then even if they have different shows or play different movies, one sitcom is basically the same as any other with a few exceptions, right? Most everything is pretty much the same. There are only slight changes, actor changes or whatever. Many movies, you can see if you can think of a couple movies that are basically the same movie, but with different actors. So I remember maybe in the last 10 years or something, there were like 2 movies that were about the idea of having friends with benefits. And, you know, will it work? And they're friends, but they start sleeping together, and let's see what happens. And, you know, it's the same kind of like crap. If you know the movies, then good. But it's the appearance of diversity, it's the appearance of plurality, but the delivery is the kind of same thing. So, sameness and homogeny amidst the appearance of diversity is part of what characterizes the culture industry. Another thing that characterizes the culture industry is identification. You know, the people who make TV shows and movies and music, they want you to identify with what you're watching. Why? So you'll keep watching it. If you see something that you can identify with, say, oh, that's like me, or oh, I know that, then you're gonna stay tuned. The problem is, if everything is the same, and that sameness wants you to identify with it, then the people participating in mass culture are gonna effectively become the same. And whereas with art that challenge us to think critically, now we have this banal culture that basically encourages us to think the same. So the ways in which it, you know, identifies, like pick a show that you like, and then you're talking about it with your friends, let's say, and then you ask yourselves, well, which character do you like the best? It's kind of like, which character do you most identify with? But maybe the characters really aren't all that different from one another. You know, like, I don't know what kind of shows you watch. I don't watch too many newer shows, but I don't know if you're thinking about a show like Game of Thrones or something weird. A little weirder than what you would see on like an ABC sitcom. But if you take here's just a silly, you know, if you take this show Friends, right? This was around in the 90s. You know, you have 6 different characters, but in some ways they're all the same. Or, you know, do you think with 6 characters you think you would have some amount of diversity, but if you look at them and their lifestyles and their opinions, there's not really all that too much diversity, even if there's a little character differentiation. So the point is sameness and this kind of identification. And the third thing about the culture industry is that it sort of sets the standard for thinking. I mean, if you think about, like, I mentioned rom-coms, romantic comedies before, that, you know, by and large are meant to appeal to women a little bit more than men. You know, you think of a certain kind of romantic comedy, whatever you want, and you ask yourself, well, it's painting a certain idea of love. And what is that idea of love? And this idea that, you know, love at first sight, or we fall in love and a person is supposed to, you know, fulfill us. It's like that line in Jerry Maguire, you complete me, as if another person is supposed to, you know, it's in your relationship, romantic relationship with one other person, that you will feel your full self, or that you will feel fulfilled. Or if you don't have that, then you're not as good, you're unfulfilled, and you should feel unsatisfied. And then we got this idea in various rom-coms that people are supposed to live, you know, happily, and they lived happily, what's the phrase, they lived happily forever and ever, or something like that. And it sets a certain standard for our desires, for what we want. Or you see characters that, you know, become romantic and they have the craziest, wildest sex, and you think that that is supposed to, you know, be part of the standard. And then if you don't have that, or if you have certain complications with that, then again it's meant to make you feel, you know, less than, or insufficient, or incompetent, or something like that. Here's a good movie about love. It's on Netflix right now. It's called Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind. And I would recommend that movie. It's a mouthful, I know. I would recommend that. It's kind of an arty indie movie because of the way in which it shows the real ugly side of love, or the very complicated human side of love, a certain portrayal of love that you don't normally get in kind of mainstream movies. So the things I was highlighting about the culture industry is homogenation and sameness, this idea that it gets you to identify with it. Part of that homogenation, the first one was also homogenation amidst the appearance of diversity. Secondly, self-identification. And the third one, which I was just talking about, now I forgot what it was. That it sets the tone for certain. Thirdly, that it sets the tone for certain kinds of thinking. Thinking about certain philosophical concepts, let's say, like love or like justice or like courage, right? So, all of those things, you know, how we think about love and what our wants and desires are, if they are affected by the culture industry, then the culture industry is kind of manufacturing our individuality, manufacturing what we want, rather than what we want being truly a product of, you know, what we think if we weren't, you know, manipulated in very subtle and non-obvious ways by the culture industry. So again, to repeat, that is yet another way in which the social atmosphere that is outside of us comes to penetrate within us, obstruct our thinking, affect our desires, affect what we want. And Marcuse was the last person I'll talk about in the next video, was a sort of student of Adorno and Horkheimer, and he picks up on this idea of the creation of wants. So watch the next video to hear more on that.